Hi there, this is a tutorial on how to use Accessorizer to customize a user interface using the scripting backend of Accessorizer. So if you don't know what Accessorizer is, it's a Unity engine editor extension that controls the visibility of meshes or groups of meshes in a kind of a way that can be used for character customization or really any kind of modular or customized um, situation for accessorizing a particular item or mesh. So the demo scene that comes with Accessorizer does have a UI on it, and it dynamically generates those drop downs to show what possible selections for any particular mesh would be. So this is the out of the box kind of script, and you can find that script on in the demo UI behavior script that comes with the asset, and that script will generate these drop downs. So the question is, what if you want to have an icon based UI such as this shown in the top, where you can select the image and have it change based on that, because the configuration does include a icon slot for each one of the geometry. So I'm going to go ahead and show kind of the same logic that was used to create these drop downs to generate this icon based interface, and I'm going to do it in two ways because you can really have two different approaches at it, one being a more custom or a static configuration where you are determining, putting each one of the icons into the UI, and it is what it is. At the start of the game, it's the same, and if you want to add one, then you have to manually add it. The other approach is to have a dynamically built situation, same as these drop downs, where as you add to the configuration, then the user interface would then update without having to make any changes. So I'm going to show the first approach as being the kind of more custom approach. I'm going to remove the kind of final product here. So just to show the setup in the scene, we just have this panel, and it's in the top left, and it's got a vertical layout group assigned to it, and this image is just the background image, and the control child size, width and height, and child force expand width and height is on. So that's just the in scene kind of parent object that is going to hold the UI, and then we have two prefabs. One prefab is almost the same thing, although instead of a vertical layout, it's got a horizontal layout group. There's some spacing there. The child alignment is middle center as opposed to upper center, and none of the child expansion things are on. And then so that is saved as a prefab, and so that is going to actually contain our rows. Again, this is why Accessorizer doesn't have anything about any built-in code or whatnot when it comes to the UI, except for the example, because every game might want to have their UI shown a little bit different. But in this example, I'm showing a situation where you want to have a row of 4 by 4, or each row being 4, and so that's what this is going to show. So the second prefab is really what's going to hold each one of the icons. So it's got an image and a button, and the button is generic, no changes or customizations there, and really same for the image. So it's all blank at this point, and all I did was create a button really, and then saved it as a prefab. And so what it's going to look like when we add these as children, then it's just going to automatically, these layout groups, horizontal layout group and vertical layout group, are going to work to lay these out automatically for us. So that's the UI layout. The script is where all the magic happens, obviously. So I'm going to create a new script here, and I guess just to point out a requirement of this, so in the demo scene, these character models have obviously some specific elements on them. Because they don't have different hairstyles in this example, I had to add just some dummy game objects. They're really just transforms that would represent the different hair geometry that you would have. And for the hair icons, these are really just some quote-unquote stolen, borrowed, whatever you want to say, icons, just for an example here, and they're just set to Sprite 2D and UI. So that's the setup, and we're going to go ahead and add that hair behavior to the main parent panel. And I'm going to go ahead and just open that up. And so we're just going to need some imports and some references here. So I'm going to do using Unity Engine .ui because we need some references to the sprites and images, and then accessorize.runtime, so that's going to be needed for this accessory config reference. So that's a reference to the actual scriptable object or the asset that holds our whole configuration. And I'm going to need a group name and an item index. So why I call this a custom solution is because this script is going to be on each one of these buttons, and that I'm sorry, the script is on the main parent, but each element is going to have, each element is actually going to have this script, so that it's not actually going to be on here. Sorry, that's my fault. We're going to put the script onto the UI element prefab. So this is the icon or button image. So each one of the images is going to have these. So that's why we're going to have a custom group name and an item index. So that's why, again, it's custom because anytime you add one, it's going to you're going to have to set this group name and item index. So really at the start, we just need to get some references, and I'm going to add 2 more references here to the item. So obviously each icon only wants to track one item, and the group is what group that item is contained in. So we'll see why we need both of those here in a second. When the scene starts, I'm just going to find the actual group. So this is our hair group. We want to we'll do a find on this list, g such that g.name is equal to group name. So whatever group name I put into the script for that icon, it's going to find that group. And we're going to set the item to the group.items at the item index that we also provide on the script. And here's the kind of the screwy part that might update in the future. We need to get an image from this actual button. So that's going to get the image that we need to set the sprite of. Oops. Why that's having such a problem. Alright, and we will get we'll set the sprite of that image to one that we're going to actually create from our icon reference. So that icon reference is what on the accessory config, when we created all of our hair, we set this icon to these icons, or these images. So we're going to be using that to create a sprite. So there's that icon reference, and then these next few things are defining that sprite. And again, I might change this to actually take a sprite instead, because I'm not sure it makes sense to have a texture 2D on there. So that create call will create a sprite out of this icon and set it on the image. So that's it for that script. If we come back in here, once it compiles, we'll go to the prefab, UI element prefab, and we're going to set the accessory config on there. And so this is why it's custom, because we, in order to get the end result, all we would do would be to add a panel row, add an element to it, duplicate that 3 times, and we'll set the group name to hair, and then apply that so that takes all of the other ones are going to now have hair, and then we'll just change the item index, so 0, 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, and I don't think there's a 7th one. So when we play, then that should grab all of those images from those icons and place them there. Okay, so that's achieving our end goal, but again, why it's called custom is because when you want to add one, you have to duplicate another element here and then set the index, and then so these item indexes take are actually referencing the accessory config. It's really this order, exactly this order right here. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So again, it's pretty custom in that. So to do it dynamically, we just need to use a little bit more complex script to instantiate the row prefab, and then instantiate any, however many child prefabs, and then set the images. So I'm going to go ahead and show that real quick. I'm going to remove this panel script, and we'll go ahead and create another script. Hair dynamic panel, and that's going to compile. So we're actually going to need to put this one just on the root object. So if I go to this root object, this parent object is what's going to do all the work. So when I open that up, hair dynamic panel, please. Okay. Alright, so it's kind of the same idea, but we're going to need some the UI, and we'll also need that runtime here. We'll get a accessory config reference, and then 2 prefabs, one for the row prefab with the horizontal layout group on it, and then one for the element prefab, which is for each icon. So we're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to get the group. I'm going to find the group such that group.name is equal to hair. And then I'm going to calculate the row count. So this is how many of the row prefabs I'm going to need to instantiate. And that's going to be an integer. We're going to take the group.items.count. So that's how many total items, how many total hairstyles there are divided by 4, which in our case, if we have 7 divided by 4, and since I'm converting that to an integer, that would go down to 1, right? So because 8 divided by 4 is 2, 7 divided by 4 is 1 and some change. So we're going to do that, and then we're just going to add 1 to that. So it's always going to be 1 more with that rounding or whatnot. And then I need an element index to store as I'm looping through all of the items, basically to make sure that I don't instantiate more items than the total amount. Because what I'm going to do is loop through the row count. So this should actually say row count. There. So for each row, I'm going to instantiate a new row prefab. And we're going to set that row group set parent to this transform, so that's going to set the row to be a child of this main hair panel. And then we're going to do another loop, and we're going to make that loop as long as it's less than 4, because we want 4 per row, and we also want the element index, which we're going to increment here in a minute, to stay less than the group.items.count. So again, like I said, that's going to keep us from basically on the last row. It's going to make sure that we don't instantiate more items than we have. So I'm going to get, so this is for each one of the icons. I'm going to get that item, at the current element index. So in the first iteration, it's just going to be 0, and we're going to instantiate it, a prefab for it. So that's going to create our image button, and then we're going to set its parent to the group that we just also instantiated. Sorry, this row group. And we'll also set the name so that it's easy to track. And so items can have a display name, but if they don't, so that's what I'm going to use this null propagator. It'll use the display name, but if the display name is null, then it's going to use just the name of the transform. So that's going to set the name of the actual icon button in the hierarchy to match the hairstyle. So here's where we're going to create that image again, or we're going to get the image. component off of our button that we instantiated, and then we're going to do that kind of screwy sprite.create, which is using the icon, create a new rect, and it's going to need a vector for the pivot. And pixels per unit. And so we're setting the sprite, and the last thing we need to do is increment that element index. Alright, so that's it. So what this will do is going to create however many rows we need. It's going to create those and set the parents properly, and then set those icons. So and we just set our references here to the config and the row prefab and the element prefab. Then when we play, it should do the exact same thing that it did for the other one. So there we go. It created one element for each of them, and we didn't hard code it. So if I were to go into this and create another item, say hair 7, which is also going to require I duplicate that. So if I come in here, hair 7, and say we use some random, we use a hobgoblin eye for that one because I don't have an icon for it. So that should create the 8th icon here. See that? So I don't have to, you know, manually set that. So the dynamic thing is actually quite nice because it will do that for you, but again, it's a little bit more complex. So the last thing I want to go over is how, so say when you click the button, you want that to actually change the outfit or whatnot. So that is pretty simple. What we're going to do is, I'll show it using this one here, the more basic one. So we'll add the panel row and UI element. We'll duplicate that out, and then I'll add back the custom script, which this would work with the dynamic script as well. So in this behavior, since we have, let me bring it over here. We have a reference to this item in the group because we got it at the beginning. We can just add a method called enable item, and we'll just say group dot active item is equal to item. So that will set the group's active item, and all we need to do then is when the button on this panel gets clicked, we'll add an event, give it a reference to itself, and then call that enable item function. Okay, so I do want to show how to do that with the dynamic script, because it is quite a bit different actually, because we have the script on the main panel and we don't have direct references to the group name and the item name and all of that. So, but there is a fairly simple way to do it, and so we're going to look at that real quick. So this is the dynamic script. So in here we're doing everything all the same, but we're going to add these 4 lines of code. and obviously that same function where we're going to set an item active. Although this set item active function is going to, instead of taking, it's instead of being blank here and setting the group and the item, it's actually going to take those as arguments. So this is kind of a sneaky little way to do it. So as we're creating the buttons, so this is in the loop for the buttons, we are going to also get a reference to the button instead of just the image. We're going to get a reference to that button, which is the on the prefab. That's going to give us a reference to this component right here. And so what we're trying to do is add to this on-click event dynamically. So if you remember in the custom script, we added an event here, and then we gave it a reference to that object, and then we manually chose the function to call. So we want to do that dynamically here. So this is a cool way of doing it. We're going to call button.onClick.addListener, and this is a parameter list, these two brackets, so there's nothing there. So this is what in programming would be called an anonymous function. So if I cut that out, it looks like just a regular function call, and what it's wanting is a Unity action or a call. So what we're doing by just providing this bit of code, we're actually defining a function in line. So that's why it's kind of called it's kind of a manual function that's within it. So within that function, we have a reference to the group and the item. So it creates a function that every time the onClick gets called, then it's for that particular one, it's going to call with that group and the item. So again, it's really kind of a sneaky thing. This is a very pretty complex programming concept, but it's very cool. So in the example, I was able to find some random hair here for our dummy, so he's going to look really silly. But I did that just so that I can test to make sure that event is going to work. So you can see as you click the icons, then the hairstyles are changing. So that's it. I appreciate you watching, and I hope this is helpful.